Hello, welcome to the show To The Point with Manisha. Today we have a special guest in our show. That is Joali Castro, who is a 3 times Emmy Award winner for his extraordinary documentaries. And you must watch those documentaries; those will be giving in the description. And also, we have seen a journalism changing from decades, like how it has been changed in the past 30 years. And a part of that is my professor, instructor, and we are lucky to have him as a guide for future journalists to make us better. So welcome, Professor Alkistro. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, let me start the podcast with this one question because I always have this question in my mind, and also so many others have shooted out this question for me: Is journalism biased?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. I think it depends on how you define journalism. Real journalism, in my view, shouldn't be biased. It should be as close to that ever elusive word, the truth, as possible. How do we get there? We get there by gathering facts, factual information. And how do we gather factual information? By doing the job of a journalist, by questioning relentlessly those simple questions: who, what, where, when, why, how. Those questions lead us to gain factual information. But to your point, is journalism biased? If you consider everything that's on the internet that poses as journalism, then yes, there's a lot of biased information out there. And that's really the dilemma, not so much of real journalists, it's the dilemma for the audience, because the audience has to know, is the information that they're getting reliable? Reliable sources of information puts a lot of burden on the audience. And today, in the fast-moving societies in which we live, people don't have time that are not journalists to determine whether this or that or the other is factual. I think one of the things that can help solve that problem, and it's one of the things that I write about frequently, is media literacy. From the earliest age, from preschool to the first through the 12th grade and all through college, I think that part of the core curriculum of education needs to be media literacy, so that as individuals we can recognize what is true and what is false.
Yeah, when you say about this facts and reliable information, earlier a week ago I had a small conversation, like chit chat with my one of my friend. As a Tollywood reporter, I was an entertainment reporter back in India. So I know the gossips. I know what is fact and what speculations are happening. When I was explaining my friend, no, that is a speculation, that is not true. But she is thinking that it is a truth because she have seen n number of speculation has in use in the social media.
Yes. And today, with the computer algorithms, one speculation can become 100 of the same speculations.
Yeah, and audience are believing it's a fact, and they're not even in a stage that accepting that it's a fact. No, it's not a fact. When the real information is coming, they say that no, it might be a speculation, and the speculation might be a news. And when it is coming to the algorithm, as you said, so if you're seeing the algorithm for a reporter, not for a reporter, for a news channel, algorithm also matters, because I think that we should also see your algorithm, and our news agencies also 50% or might 30% depend on the algorithms also. So when it comes to the algorithm, what do you choose, a story or a content?
Yeah, well, I think you have to choose a factual story and factual content. I will always go back to that. Look, I'm an old-time journalist.
Yeah.
I went through a system at NBC News that taught us right from the beginning of entering into that organization what I believe to be the right way to gather news. And I can tell you that on the evening news or nightly news, when a reporter was in the field covering a story, they would have to send their script in to an editor in New York even before they edited their story on video. And the editor would go through the script line by line and determine if there was any changes that needed to be made. Then once it was approved, the reporter in the field could then go ahead and edit their story. But also, there's a lead in, as you well know, to every story that the anchor reads. Well, there would be a writer who would write the lead in, hit a send button, and then it would go to a national editor. The national editor would look it over, make a change, hit a send button, then it went to a senior producer. From the senior producer to the executive producer, and from the executive producer to the managing editor. It had to go through 5 vets before it would become part of the script for the show that night. Things are changing.
Yeah, because now there's no time of going to passing through those 5 editors. Now, when I was reporting, I was just reporting for my editor. She would just check, edit, do all the editings, what bit is needed, and add-ons, and give me back the story, and she'll decide whether the story should run. So, what do you think? What is your opinion on it? How things changed, like from last 10 years, like 30 years, and now? How has the journalism changed?
Well, the evening news broadcasts still do that same system that I just described, where it goes through checks through 5 different stages. However, they don't lock their rundown until 3:30 in the afternoon. They still have 3 hours to go through that process. Cable news is different. We went from the 24-hour news cycle to the 24-second news cycle. And that's the problem right now. Things are going on the air on cable news and on the internet that are not being checked. And being first is never as good as being right.
It's a statement, because when earlier we have discussed about this in the Twitter, especially in the Twitter, Facebook. We are getting the videos, the first videos. Let me speak. When the Twin Tower collapse or the Mumbai terrorist attack, like journalists were out of that Mumbai terrorist attack. I don't know how the reporting has been done here when the Twin Towers was collapsed. But in the Mumbai terrorist attack in 2008, the journalists were risking their life, standing outside the Taj Mahal hotel, and they was giving the first-hand information. And now in social media, everyone has their mobiles, everyone has their accounts on the social media, and the first-hand information is getting from the social media. Even the news reporters and everyone are searching the videos in the social media. And what is your opinion on that?
Well, technology is going to constantly change the business and the profession of journalism. There's no question about it. We've seen that change. I've lived through the change, right? But when I first started at NBC, we were still shooting film overseas. The Vietnam War was before my time, but I do know that the Vietnam War that I was watching in my living room as a teenager, waiting for my draft card to come up, I was watching a war that was a day old, because the film would have to be flown from Saigon to Los Angeles, get processed. So it was always 24 hours behind what we were watching. Of course, videotape and live satellite trucks began to change all of that. And a very wise boss that I once had said that what's happening with live video is like a leaf floating down the stream. When you see the leaf before you, you know it's a leaf, but you don't know where it came from. And that's part of the problem with all the mobile devices that can upload immediately through the internet. We know where it is. We know it's a picture of the Taj Mahal. We know the Taj Mahal just got bombed, but we don't know if that video is completely accurate or not. By the way, parenthetically, you brought up the Taj Mahal. One of my dear friend's sons was working in the Taj Mahal when it was blown up. Fortunately, he was not on the shift that was in the hotel at that time. So, yeah, I mean, technology is going to constantly change everything that we do. And I'm almost afraid of the technological changes that you're going to live through in your career.
Yeah. Do you think the technology is improving day by day, and do you think it's good or bad in journalism, if you say?
We, on the one hand, we have access to more information than we've ever had before, and I think that's a good thing. But we also have access to more bad information than we've ever had before, and I think that's a bad thing. And again, it comes back to this whole concept of media literacy. If you are a media literate person, you know how to question things, then you will, in a way, be your own journalist. And you will be able to determine whether something was from a reliable source or not, and you can discard it or keep it.
Yeah. As I enter the journalism field, I have been seeing things differently. Like, not like before. If there is any accident or happening, if there is any incident happening, I'll be thinking like, is there anything happened earlier? Is that is related to this? Or I have been seeing things differently. Like if there is accident on the road, I'm going, I don't know for what reason. I'm curious to know what happened there. Is there anything big happening? So I'll stop my bike or car aside so is that happen to you also?
You mean, yes. I mean, I think what you're describing is the sort of inner mind of the journalist, which is basically you're a curious person. And I think that's the absolute most importantness of all of the skills that a journalist has. Having a curious mind is probably the most important.
So let's discuss about this Twin Tower. As you explained us in the class also what happened. When this Twin Tower collapsed, what was your experience? And later, a decade later, there was this related person death. The United States Navy had shot him dead, Osama bin Laden. So how did you cover that? What was your expression and experience while that change in 2001 and 2010 something?
Well, my personal experience on the day that the Twin Towers collapsed or were blown up was I was in Rome at the time. I was on vacation. I had returned to New York to live. I was no longer living in Rome, but I was on vacation with my wife. And I went back after a very nice lunch, I went back to our pensione where we were staying. And the phone rang, and it was a friend of mine who worked for ANSA, which is the Italian Associated Press. And he said, Giuseppe, pack your bags, you're going home. And I said, haha, funny. You know, journalists always do that when you're on vacation. Like a big story's happened, you have to leave. And he said, no, turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV and saw what the whole world was watching, because the whole world was watching it live. And once the second tower was hit, we knew it was terrorism. The first tower was hit. There was very if you watch the recordings of the live broadcasts of those first hours, you will see how careful the journalists were. A plane hit tower number 1. And we're not sure what has happened here. Was it an accident, et cetera, and so on. And then when the second plane hit, immediately you knew. There's a terrorist. So the coverage, of course, was 24/7. In the beginning, all programming was interrupted in the United States. All television shows, nothing was on except for coverage of the Twin Towers. Even commercials were all interrupted. I was in Rome, as I said, and I called New York, and I said, I will get on the very first plane I can get out of here. I'm going to call Swiss Air because I think they'll be the first ones allowed into New York airspace, because we knew already that airspace was closed. And I made a reservation for the following Saturday. The Twin Towers was hit on a Tuesday. And that meant that I was going to be stuck in Italy for 4 days, at least. We didn't know how long at that time. Well, I would tell you from personal experience, I didn't have one more meal in a restaurant because the phone kept ringing, and it was all Italian friends saying, we don't want the Americans to eat alone. And every night we were at somebody's house for dinner. There was a moment of silence in Rome. Rome is kind of like Mumbai. It is never silent. The entire city was silent for that moment of silence. You couldn't even hear Vespas going. All the Vespas stopped. And then I was watching TV at a friend's house one night during that week. And it was something that I wrote about a few years later. for the 5th anniversary. But as I was watching TV, they were covering Gaeta in Italy, which is just near Naples, and it's where the American 6th Fleet is based. And the entire town had marched to the gates of where the American naval base is, and they were carrying signs and it said, "We are all Americans now." And that really chokes you up,
Yeah.
even all these years later. Yeah.
When the Osama bin Laden was dead, how did you cover that? And what was the United States reaction?
Well, by that time, I was a senior producer in news special events. So now I was in the control room at all times and for all breaking news. And yes, I was in the control room for that breaking news. And it was something that was not totally unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that President Bush was determined to get him and did not. But we knew that President Obama was also determined to get him and ultimately did when he gave the green light. I don't know if you've seen the videos of the Situation Room where President Obama and all of the military were when the announcement was made and the video was being shown of the attack. But it was, the loss of a human life, no matter how horrible, is a loss. But in this case, I think justice was done.
Yeah. You have been into this investigation journalism. I have seen your profile. So is it hard, or are you risking your lives when you're doing an investigation journalism, especially into the drugs and cocaine? You have covered the drugs in Italy and cocaine in
Yeah, there were. I didn't do. I will say that most of my career was in hard news and in special event news, and then in big live broadcasting news. But I did do some investigative reporting, and yes, one of the stories you mentioned was when cocaine started coming into Europe. It was a deal that was being made between the Italian mafia and the Colombian cartels. The Italians were trading heroin from Turkey for cocaine from Colombia. And that was the story that we were investigating. We were investigating it with the Dutch police because the cocaine was coming into Europe through the port of Rotterdam in container ships. So that was what that story was about. For me, a little bit more personal investigative story was investigating the 'Ndrangheta. There are 3 mafias in Italy. The Camorra, which is based in Naples, the Mafia, which is the one that's more well known from The Godfather, which is based in Sicily, and the 'Ndrangheta, which has now become the most powerful one, which is from Calabria, which is where my family is from. So we wanted to interview the Don of the 'Ndrangheta for our story. And we went to a place called Taurianova, which is in Calabria, about 15 minutes from the village where my family is from and where I still have cousins that live there. I did not tell them I was in Calabria during that time. We stayed intentionally in a place a little bit further away called Tropea. And we went to the town and we put in a request to interview the Don. And the reason we said was because Taurianova had the highest per capita murder rate in Italy at that time, higher than the highest per capita murder rate in the United States, which was Washington, D.C. at that time. And we wanted to get the Don's opinion on this. And he agreed to the interview. And so, it was really fascinating to be inside of that.
So, how was your journalism after that interview? Because interviewing a Don is not a small thing. In journalism, you're risking your life. And how did your scale grow?
Well, actually, and this is maybe the commercial side of broadcasting, our scale really grew. My partner when I was in the Rome Bureau was my reporter, Arthur Kent. And I was his producer and his bureau chief. And Arthur and I were, we won one of the Emmys we won was for the revolution in Romania, for the coverage of Ceausescu and the revolution in Romania. And then we went on to the Gulf War, and we were based in Tehran. And during that time, Saddam Hussein started sending Scud missiles into Saudi Arabia, and we continued to report live from the rooftop as the missiles were landing. And so Arthur earned the nickname, because he was a handsome guy, of Scud Stud. He hated that name, but he was called the Scud Stud.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, People magazine came to Tehran, Saudi Arabia during the war to interview the two of us, and he was on the cover of People magazine. I wasn't on the cover. I was on the inside in a photograph.
Nice. So you have traveled countries, you have traveled world, I think. So you have come to India too, and for the interviews and everything. So is there any situation like you went for the interviewing a big personality, and like you have taken your all camera members, crew members, and there when you're going what I heard is like big personalities like have their own production. So, and you will be the interview person. After reaching there, they'll be saying that no, I have my camera person. You can do your you will be an interviewee, and later we'll give you the editings.
No, that would be a violation of NBC News policy. So we always shot our own material. The one exception I can think of is during election year. You know what a spin room is? It's a term you may not use. In our politics, when you have the debates that lead up to the debates where you have multiple candidates, after the debate, there is a big room that's set up with different camera positions, and it's called the spin room, and you will interview the surrogates and even sometimes the candidate. Well, in that case, there will be one camera assigned, and it might be even from ABC, but we will go in rotation to interview the candidate, and ABC will shoot for NBC. Another camera position might be NBC shooting for ABC. So that's the one time where we use different cameras. But NBC and all of the networks here have a policy book. And every employee has to read those policy books. It's a 3-ring binder, and it has a lot of these questions are answered in it. Before you're even allowed to go out in the field, you need to know what the rules and the policies are of the organization. Even as a young producer, very early on, one of the very first magazine stories that I was able to produce was in Mexico City. And it was on an icon in the Catholic Church called the Virgin of Guadalupe. And without going into the detail of the story, we were going to interview the Archbishop of Mexico City. Okay? So we went to the office at the cathedral, and we set up to interview with the Archbishop. And then the Archbishop's priest came out, his aide came out and said, the Archbishop would like the questions. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't give you the questions ahead of time. And he said, well, the Archbishop demands the questions. And I said, that would be a violation of NBC News policy, and I can't do that. And he said, well, then there's no interview. And I said, well, then there's no interview. And I said, pack up, guys, let's go. And he went in to tell the Archbishop, came out 30 seconds later and said, okay, there'll be an interview. So sometimes you have to call their bluff.
Okay.
Producers should have one word that is never in their vocabulary. No.
No. Okay. It's hard to say no, but we should there. Yeah. You have brought up this election one. Over here, I heard that NBC is slightly to the Democratic Party. MSNBC, yeah. So will the channels like news agencies work for the political parties?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll give you a little background on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the very first cable news network was CNN. And CNN started, you'd have to fact check me on this, but I think in 1986. CNN began And that was the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle, what we call the 24-hour news cycle, because things started picking up very quickly with cable TV on the air all the time. But CNN basically covered the news in the same way that the networks were. They were just doing it faster, but they were adhering to middle-of-the-road, factual-based journalism. And then Fox came along. Now, Fox was started by Rupert Murdoch, but he hired a man named Ailes. And Ailes actually came from CNBC, the business channel. But he did a bunch of research and determined that the audience that was most likely to watch many hours of 24-hour news skewed conservatively. So he decided that Fox would be the conservative network. And all of their coverage, and over the years it got worse and worse and worse, but their coverage tended to pander to the conservative audience. NBC started MSNBC in 1996. And in the beginning, MSNBC, it was a partnership with Microsoft. Microsoft paid for the building and the computers and all of that. NBC supplied the content in terms of reporters and news coverage. And then jointly they hired the anchors. Okay? And actually at MSNBC, they don't call them anchors, they call them presenters, okay, as opposed to an anchor. An anchor connotes in the United States that you're a journalist and you've worked your way up the journalistic ladder to become an anchor. I had an interview with a prospective student for the fall the other day, and he was an actor, and I said, why do you want to come to the journalism program? And he said, because I'm really good on camera and I want to be an anchor. And I said, well, first you have to be a journalist. So in any event, so NBC started MSNBC, and again, it was kind of like CNN. It was a middle-of-the-road, factual-based journalism. But then over time, particularly in prime time, in the late night, shows, it became more and more and more the liberal network. And so I'm an equal opportunity offender. I always tell my students, I will watch CNN, I will watch MSNBC, I'll even watch Fox, but I know what I'm getting when I watch them.
Fox is in support with Republic Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yesterday I was watching Fox call with Trump. The news anchor was speaking in favor to the Trump, where he was asking about the vice president announcement in his channel that would be a breaking for him, for his channel. So he said Trump was saying that, no, I'll do it later sometime, and the first channel will be yours. So I thought, the Fox would be in support with Republic Party. Yeah,
Fox is basically the mouthpiece for the Republican Party.
Oh, okay.
And MSNBC, the difference between MSNBC and Fox is, yes, MSNBC is liberal and Fox is conservative. The difference between the two is that MSNBC will load the dice, we say. They will book more liberal people. They will book more Democrats. They might eliminate some points of view that are conservative. The difference is Fox will out and out lie on the air.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as the elections are months ahead, so which one do you think, Democratic or Republic?
Well, if you asked me that 2 weeks ago, I would have had a different opinion, but I've seen the debate since then. And I'm concerned for the Democratic Party. Now that if you asked me this question when I was working at NBC, I would just tell you I have no opinion. But I guess
you're not supposed to say that you're though NBC is not supporting Democratic Party, you say MSNBC is supporting, but as a part of the NBC family or the fame, you're not supposed to say against to the Democratic Party or make a statements against.
I would never. When I was at NBC, I would not ever express my political point of view publicly. It was just something that journalists don't do. You have you're a citizen, you're allowed to vote, you're allowed to be a member of a party, but you don't express yourself publicly in that way. Now, as a professor, I guess I'm allowed to say whatever the hell I want.
Yeah, you got your freedom.
So I watched the debate, and I was very troubled by the performance of President Biden. And it wasn't just his hesitancy to speak and his loss of words. If you turn the sound off, even the optics, he looked lost. And so I think that there's a very strong chance that he could lose the election. You know, there's also the strong chance that he could have a comeback. Yeah. He's come back before. He gave a very strong NATO speech today, but that was with a prompter. You know, it's a different situation than thinking on your feet. So if it were me and I were writing an editorial, I would probably be saying one of the points, everybody is knocking Joe Biden right now, even on the Democratic side. Yeah. A lot of people are saying he should step down, he should step down. It's really just his inner circle of supporters. Even as I was coming to Sacred Heart today, even Pelosi came out with a hesitant remark about he should reconsider, something along those lines. And I think that what a lot of pundits who are expressing their opinion, one of the things that they're missing is there's a real opportunity here for the Democrats. Mm-hmm. The one thing that, other than the MAGA Republicans and the completely behind Joe Biden Democrats, but the whole middle of the voter population, the one thing that they both agreed on is they weren't happy with either candidate. If the Democrats went into the convention and put somebody exciting like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, if they put her on the ticket, the first woman, well, not the first woman to run for president, but it would be so exciting. It would create tremendous excitement, and I think all those voters who weren't happy with either candidate would move in that direction. And given a choice between a new, exciting, from Michigan, battleground state, Wisconsin, right next door, battleground state, Ohio, also in the Midwest, battleground, well, usually Republican, but potentially a battleground state with enough excitement. Pennsylvania, battleground state. Gretchen Whitmer would appeal to all of those states.
Yeah, so we can say that people are neither happy with both candidates. I can say they're confused or...
Well, I mean, the entire country, with the exception of the MAGA Republicans, lived through the Trump presidency, and the rest of the voters don't want to see him in power again. But now the Democrats, instead of everybody talking about the 28 lies that President Trump spoke during the debate, all they're talking about is Joe Biden's age. That story will probably never go away because it hasn't gone away. They've been questioning Joe Biden's age for the past 2 years. Yes. However, it will become smaller next week when the Republican when all of the focus is on Trump and the Republican convention next week.
I always have this question, not question, but I have a kind of thought. Why legalization of abortion is always a topic for the United States election?
It's always a topic because the question of abortion has been a serious moral question in this country from the moment it was proposed. And you have two groups of people who are mainly supporters of what they call the right to life. And that is, of course, evangelical Christians and Catholics. Okay. You know, the Catholic Church is very much against abortion. So you have two voting groups that are not necessarily always aligned politically, but are aligned on this moral issue. And then, of course, you have everybody else, the right to choose. And I think that is clearly the majority in this country is the right to choose. And a super majority among women.
Yeah, Professor, yeah.
But again, I'm sure you well know that any issue in the United States that's an issue in the elections is supported by money.
Yeah.
The lobbying efforts that go on for any issue are tremendous, and we have never been. There was a very strong attempt to rid the American political system of money. It was called McCain-Feingold. It was a bill that was before Congress to get the money out of politics, and it failed.
Yeah, I feel that money plays a very important and major role in the politics. Same place in India also. If the politician has the money, he'll win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can't remove the money out of, like, we can't separate the politics and money, and we can what the thing is, and even in India, if the politician is having a huge amount, or is, first of all, I feel that state head, we have, our elections are different from yours. We have a state assembly elections, then a presidential elections, and everything. Coming to state elections, if the candidate should get a legislative party ticket, they'll first check their background about their assets.
Right.
If your assets are good, if you are able to spend a bunch of amount, or something like that, to the people, you can then he'll give you a ticket without party funds. So I strongly say that we can't separate money from politics.
Yeah, it's different democratic systems do a better job of it. I don't think you can ever eliminate it totally. You know, they just had an election in Great Britain, as I'm sure you're well aware, and it was money does not play as big a role in the elections in Great Britain as it does in the United States. In the United States, it's billions and billions of dollars that go towards elections, and I'll tell you something that is really interesting. I should have shown this video in class. Don Hewitt was the genius CBS producer who created 60 Minutes. He also produced the Kennedy-Nixon debate. And the Kennedy-Nixon debate was the first really big, you know, historically you can talk about Abraham Lincoln and Douglas and all of that, but there was no television then. But the first really big televised debate was John F. Kennedy against Richard Nixon. What's interesting about it is that those that were listening to the debate on radio thought that Nixon won. Those who watched it on television saw this young, handsome man running for president, JFK, and they thought that Kennedy won the debate. But what everybody missed was that the politicians were watching the debate, and they said, we have an endless amount of money. And those television people, they have a television set in everybody's living room. And so politics and television became partners that day.
Yeah.
That's not my observation. Don Hewitt made that observation.
Yeah. And now, which, CNN or NBC, or which channel is in the high, like in TRP ratings or anything?
In terms of on cable TV, who has, on cable?
Yeah, on cable TV.
On cable TV, I think Fox still has the biggest audience. And there was, during the last election, MSNBC pulled ahead of which was a good indicator that Trump was going to be defeated. Because if the liberal network is getting a bigger primetime audience than the conservative network, right? In terms of the networks, not cable, broadcast, I believe ABC is number one right now, and NBC is number two, and CBS is number three in the evening news. The Today Show is always number one, has been for a long, long time in terms of the morning shows on network TV.
So coming to the newspapers, the New York Times, I guess.
Yeah, the New York Times is the biggest newspaper in the United
What about
States.
the Washington Post?
Washington Post is also really important, especially within the Beltway, as we say, within Washington, D.C., but also outside of Washington, D.C. Most people who are really interested in politics are going to be reading the New York Times and the Washington Post. I have them both on my app. But the New York Times is an interesting case to look at, and I may have talked about this a little bit in class. Mark Thompson became the CEO of the New York Times about 8 or 9 years ago. He's now the president of CNN. He came to the New York Times from the BBC. And I was given the honor at graduation of introducing him in the big place where we used to have the Webster Bank Arena, where we used to have the graduation ceremony in the spring. I was the person who introduced him to 5,000 people. And when we had breakfast that morning, I asked him 8 or 9 years ago, now that you've left the BBC and you're with the New York Times, what changes are you going to make? And he said, I'm going whole hog into multimedia of every kind. And look at the New York Times website today. It is a model to me for any newspaper that wants to survive. You have to be in all of the media. Many years ago, for a few years, I used to do a workshop at Columbia University for Chinese media executives. And all these media executives, this is when China was starting to really boom. And all these Chinese media executives would come to Columbia, and we would set up a week of workshops. And it was mainly people who worked at NBC, CBS, and ABC. We would all put our heads together and who could talk about this, who could talk about that. And my topic was multimedia. And I remember at the end of my lecture, they asked one of the presidents of Guangzhou TV, in the south of China, he said, we have a lot of capital to invest in media. Which parts of the media should we be investing in? And I said, that's a very good question, and it's a very easy question for me to answer. All of them. I said, you need to be investing in all of them. And the reason I said that is, newspapers are dying, but they will not be dead.
Yeah.
Radio still exists. Podcasting exists. Video exists. The internet exists. Broadcasting still exists over the airwaves. So you need to invest in all of them. And you need to create a system that allows you to have a centralized place that repurposes all of the content that you're creating and then redistributes it out to all of the legs of the octopus.
Yeah. As you said, the newspaper, the physical newspaper is dying, but not the e-paper, which is in the phone. Most of them are preferring to subscribe the newspaper instead of having a physical paper. I have observed this in the past 1 year, because when I was working for one of the news channel. After the COVID, the physical newspapers has been dropped, but its e-paper has been increased. And coming to the website also, its algorithm is always high compared to the other one, which newspapers are high, newspaper count. And coming to the radio also, what I observed is like radio are coming up with the new concepts. Like they are grabbing the audience with their podcast and interviewing of film celebrities, like not like a boring one. They are coming up with some other new concepts. So even I thought the radio will also never die or something like that.
Yeah, everything just changes a little bit. It's I eliminated 2 paper subscriptions myself this year, because the New York Times was one of them, and the reason is because I have become so accustomed to looking at it online. And you get so much more online. You have slideshows, you have podcasts, you have New York Times audio. So now sometimes I can download a story that I didn't get a chance to read in the morning, and I can listen to it on the drive here. Interestingly, the other day I was listening to a story and the voice comes on and it says, "The following story is brought to you by an automated voice." And I was like,
It's AI.
AI reading a reporter's story.
Yeah.
And the story was about the G7 meeting, which was in Puglia in Italy.
Okay.
And I was relieved to hear that the AI voice mispronounced every Italian word.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What about the magazine? What do you think about the magazines?
You mean magazines? Magazines might have a little bit longer life because in order to read a magazine, you're going to be sitting down and reading it. Now, maybe magazine articles will, with AI generated voices, will also, become something that you listen to on audio. I've never been big myself on audio books, but I will say this. Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones wrote a book called My Life, I think was the name of the book. And a friend of mine had it on an audio book, so I wanted to hear it. And Keith Richards read the first chapter of his life, and then he must have gotten bored. So he had Johnny Depp do the whole rest of the read. And Johnny Depp reads it as if he were Keith Richards, and I found it terribly entertaining. So maybe magazines will be the same way. Maybe magazines will become more a hybrid between print and audio.
Yeah. So, I'm from India. So, do you look into the India channels, also news channels and newspapers for any?
I don't, but I look for coverage of India, probably from Western sources. I mean, I was very interested in the election, in the Indian election. I remember speaking to you and Josh about it, and about the fact that Modi had, although he had won, his party had lost a lot of seats.
Yes.
And that shows some discontent.
Between the Congress and BJP. It's been a tight, but BJP has won with slight changes around, I think so it's I don't know exact number, but it was a drop compared to the last elections. Yeah, I think Modi should take care of that.
And I also watched with interest Modi's visit to Moscow this week.
Yeah, this week.
Yeah, because for us in the United States and the opinion of the majority of Americans on the war between Russia and Ukraine, it's somewhat hurtful to see a trading partner like India meeting with Putin. But then again, if Trump gets elected, Trump will be meeting with Putin, his friend.
Yeah. Okay. So, have you been ever to India?
I've only been to India really for one big story, and that was Mother Teresa.
Okay.
And the reason, if you don't mind, I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
So I was in London at the time, and I was covering the death of Princess Diana.
Okay.
And I've never seen really an outpouring of emotion like that from British people, especially, who tend to be very...
Yeah.
And it was really heart-wrenching, the whole week of coverage. And like any big story as a journalist, you're working on adrenaline. You're getting 4 hours sleep a night, if that, and working around the clock. And finally, it was the last day. We were done covering the story. We were in the newsroom in London watching nightly news, which means it was 11:30 at night in London and 6:30 in the evening in New York. And all of a sudden, the bells on the Associated Press wire machine start ringing. We were still using paper then. And that meant a big story had just happened. And somebody came out of the wire room with a copy, handed it to the vice president, who was one of my mentors, Bill Wheatley. And he said, Mother Teresa's dead. Joe, pack your bag. You got to go to Calcutta.
Oh.
And I said, okay, let me just go to the hotel, take a shower, pack my bag, and I'll be at the airport.
Okay.
And Earlier I said, and this is a lesson in producing. Earlier I said the one word in a producer's vocabulary is not in the vocabulary, is no.
Yeah.
When I got to the airport, all of my engineers were standing there, and the head engineer said to me, Joe, we're not going anywhere. And I said, what do you mean we're not going anywhere? And he said, British Airways won't let us on the plane. We don't have visas for India. And I said, we don't need visas. I have the wire copy here that says that the Indian government has said all journalists can go to Calcutta to cover the funeral. So I walked up to the counter and I said to the person behind the counter, I said, pardon me, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't have time to talk to you. Put your supervisor on the phone. And supervisor gets on the phone and I said, I'm from NBC News. I have wire copy that says that the Indian government has said that we do not need visas to cover Mother Teresa's funeral. And she said, you're absolutely right. We just got word. You can get on the plane. And I said, good. Now, we're going to be landing in Mumbai, and then we have a 3-hour layover before we can transfer and fly to Calcutta. And I said, so I'm going to need the lounge from British Airways, and I need the refrigerator stocked with beer because I'm traveling with British engineers.
Yeah.
And they did it.
Yeah, you did it.
So
Nice.
that's what part of producing is, making your crew happy.
Yeah, you have covered many stories, Professor. The stories which make you happy and overwhelmed, and the other stories which made you a bit low. Basically, like if I'm doing a crime story or something like that, it disturbs me a lot. Not all the stories, but some or one or two, because I'll not have sleep for that day. I'll be getting those dreams. Is there any incident for you that disturbed you?
Oh, sure. There's lots of them. There's a couple that really stick in my mind. During the Romanian Revolution, one of the places that we would have to go, because it was kind of like World War II fighting. They were shooting people in the streets, and so you would have to go to the mortuary.
Okay.
And if you want an image to stick in your mind, seeing a bunch of bodies stacked up will do that to you. But there's one in particular that really got to me, and it was during when Saddam Hussein turned on the Kurdish people, and they were fleeing into refugee camps in Iran.
Okay.
So this was the second time I had been to Iran. The first time was for an earthquake. This time was for the refugees. And when we were in the refugee camp, there was a woman who came over to us, and she was holding a child, and a very blue color to the skin, which was not good. And so she was obviously wanted help. And so we took her to the Red Crescent tent and asked the doctors to help her. The next day, we saw her again, and she had the baby in her hand. And we said, didn't they help you with your child yesterday? And the translator said, that child didn't make it. This is the second child. That, I've never forgotten that.
Yeah. Being a journalist is not...
No, you have to have, and it's not in that moment that you feel it. It's never in that moment. I mean, you're a professional. You've been exposed to a lot of things. You've been exposed to the best of humanity and the worst of humanity.
Yeah.
And because you're a professional, you have a certain amount of a wall that goes up. And that's your professional wall to do your job.
Yeah.
But it's when you go back to the hotel at night
Then.
and you try to sleep. That's
Sleep.
different.
Different, yeah. Yeah, a lot of experiences, Professor. You have seen a 30 plus experience, and you have seen the good, bad, negative, positive. And I think one podcast is not enough to cover your all experience and learn from you. But last question, Professor. What is the what do you say for the future journalist?
What do I see for the future journal?
See and say. What do you suggest?
Oh, what do I suggest to the person who wants to be a journalist?
Yeah.
For example, for my students or
Yeah, because most of them are not trying this journalism field because the pay scale is less. If they're passionate, they can, but most of them, now the money is everything, most of them are seeing in the pay scale. So I don't see much curious about the journalism like back there when your age was there, like in your 30 years or 20 years ago. There was passion, there was eager, they didn't see about the pay scale and everything, they want to do the journalism, but now the interest is not there.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I have students who are now reporters and producers and even anchors, not just in the United States, but from my years at the New York Film Academy when I had a lot of international students all over the world. And but I also have students who became successful in local television and discovered that it's a lot of really, really hard work, and the pay is not so great in small stations around the country. And so some of them have left the business to go into other businesses or into public relations and things like that where there's more money. And all I can say is that if your heart is in this business, at least allow your heart to explore it. And know, and when you go out there, that you need to keep an open mind. Never think you're as smart as you think you are. Because every day you're going to learn something new. And when you're afraid, when fear strikes the brain, the heart has to answer with courage. With courage.
It's a great podcast. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah.
You're going to be one of the good ones.
Thank you. I wish.
You already are.
Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations. That was a great